Now, in order for us to be able to see any object, we need light. This light can either be natural light, that is a form of sunlight, or artificial light, that is electrical light. That is essential for us to be able to see. Now, what is it that makes an object appear the color that it does? Now, let's look at sunlight first. Sunlight actually is made up of a multitude of rays of light. It is actually electromagnetic radiation, and in this electromagnetic radiation there are a number of different light waves. We get the longest waves, which have the least energy, those the radio waves, and we go on through the spectrum, going through the infrared waves. We come to the spectrum of visible light, then we go on to the ultraviolet light rays, we go on to X-rays, gamma rays, cosmic rays. So sunlight itself has got multitude of rays or light waves that makes up the actual component. Now, visible light, the rays of visible light are actually made up of 7 different rays. These are the 7 colors which together make up visible light. They are red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. This is what makes up the spectrum of light. Now, color itself is not a property of the object, but it is actually a sensation which is produced when the light falls on the eye and stimulates the nerves in the eye. And this stimulation goes to the brain, and the brain interprets the stimulation. So that is important. We perceive an object as being that color by virtue of the sensory stimulation of the nerves of the eye and the interpretation of the brain of that stimulation. Now, when you get light falling on an object, what can happen? When light hits an object, the object can either absorb the light completely, or the light can be transmitted straight through the object, or the object can either reflect the light. Those are the 3 things which can happen when light strikes an object. Now, if light falls on a blue object, now what is it that makes it blue? Then the object will absorb all the light rays, and it will reflect the spectrum of light that is blue. The object has got the specific property of absorbing all light rays and reflecting the blue part of the light spectrum. This reflected part of light is what enters our eye, picked up by our nerve stimuli, goes to the brain, and the brain interprets it. So it is because of the object reflecting the property of light, called the blue spectrum of light, that the object will appear blue. Now, if an object were to absorb all the 7 spectrum of light, rays that make up the spectrum of light, then the object will reflect no light. So that object will appear black. If the object reflects all the 7 colors of light, then it absorbs nothing, it reflects all 7 colors, then that object will appear white. So that is why, as a practical explanation, when it is a hot sunny day, we are told wear light colors, wear the color white. That is the coolest color. Why is it that white is the coolest color? Now, if you have followed what I've said, you can now appreciate why we feel cooler when we wear any object or any cloth made from that is white. It is because that cloth has got material in it which reflects the 7 colors of light. So that is why it appears as white. So it doesn't absorb any light, so that is why we are kept cool. If we were to wear an object that is black, we will actually feel hotter, simply because that object that is black appears black because it absorbs all the light and it reflects no light. So that is why it will appear black to us, and because it is absorbing light, we actually feel hotter. So that is one practical application with regard to color, and how color is interpreted and how we perceive color, and why we feel cooler when we wear white and we feel hotter when we wear black. As I've explained, it purely depends on how many colors of the spectrum of light that object reflects. So similarly, if an object appears red, it only appears red simply because it absorbs all the colors except the red color. The red color is reflected, and that red color enters the eye, and this is how we perceive it to be red. So in other words, what we are saying is that the color of an object depends on which light rays are reflected. We get various colors are seen as a result of various combination of these 7 basic colors. So that, as we've said, depending on which colors are reflected and absorbed, that object will have that specific color. We can therefore say that the colors of plants, animals, rocks, minerals, and in fact all living and non-living objects around us varies with their respective chemical and physical structure, and consequently it varies depending upon the rays of light of the solar spectrum that each of them reflects, transmits, or absorbs. So very simply, what that means is that various plants, animals, they have got inherent physical and chemical properties which determine whether they're going to absorb or reflect any specific color or spectrum of light, and that is what determines its color. Now, in the appreciation and the understanding of these wondrous ways of Allah's laws, we are told in Surah 35, verse 27, where Allah draws our attention to this phenomena of color and asks us to appreciate, to ponder, and to reflect on this. We are told in the Quran, "Do you not see that Allah sends down rain from above? With it we then bring out produce of various colors, and in the mountains are newly created strata of rocks, white, red, and various shades of color, and intensely black. And so amongst men and crawling creatures and cattle are they of various colors. Those who possess the knowledge of these sciences really appreciate the mighty powers of the laws of Allah. They know that His law is omnipotent and provides protection for those who abide by it." So we've discussed this verse before, where Allah draws our attention to the beautiful phenomena of color in the earth's environment, in plants, in animals, and amongst human beings. And He asks us to ponder and reflect and appreciate His beauty and artistry. Now, if we take, just for an example, one simple fruit like the simple mango, it is said that in a country like India alone, there are almost 2,000 varieties of this fruit. There are 2,000 species of mango found in India alone. Each different, each got its own taste, its own texture, and juicy and tasty for man's benefit. A simple thing with so much variations and gradations, Allah has indeed blessed us with such produce. We need to look in the Quran, where Allah draws our attention to this. Let's take the first reference in Surah 13 verse 4, where Allah says, "On the earth are adjacent tracts, vineyards, agricultural lands, date palms, similar and not similar, watered with the same water. Yet we make some of them more excellent than the others to eat. Verily, in it are signs for those who reflect." Again in Surah 16 verse 11 we are told, "With the rain He causes to produce for you corn, olives, date palms, grapes, and every kind of fruit. Verily, in this is a sign for those who reflect." So we can see that Allah is requesting us to reflect on the variety of fruits and produce that we find growing from the earth. A very important point is brought to our attention. Allah says they are watered with the same water, but yet they give rise to various different forms, shapes, and tastes. They are all so different, but yet they draw their nutrients from the same soil, and they get the water from the same water. They get their water from the rain, and they draw the nutrients from the same soil, yet we get such a vast variety of produce and fruits. Now this happens mainly due to the unique genetic constitution which each of these plants have. This genetic constitution actually controls which elements a particular plant takes up from the soil and which elements it requires to produce its particular fruit. We find not only a vast variety of different fruits, but also we find such a variety even in the same product. This is what I referred to in the beginning with regard to the simple mango. It is absolutely astonishing that in India they have calculated their, as I've said, it is an interesting fact, so I'm going to repeat it, that in India alone they have said the simple mango, there are more than 2,000 varieties of mango. 2,000 varieties of mango. And this is indeed a marvel, that Allah has created one fruit with so many different variations and tastes. And this is what Allah tells you. Look and reflect and ponder that He has brought forth such variations, although they have their same nutrients and the same basic constituents which they need for survival. But yet we get so much variety in the produce. Now this again is mentioned in Surah 6 verse 99. This variety of fruits. We are told in the Quran, it is He who sends down rain from above, and with it we produce vegetation of all kinds. We produce from it green buds, from which we bring forth the thick clustered grain, and from the date palm, from the pollen thereof, pendant branches, and we bring forth gardens of grapes, and the olives, and pomegranates, each similar in kind, and yet different in variety. Look upon the fruit thereof, when they bear fruit, and upon its ripening. Herein verily are signs for people who believe. So here in this verse, as we've mentioned, Allah draws our attention to the variety in the produce. Allah asks us to look at the produce, see the variety, see how they appear, taste its juiciness, and give thanks and blessings that He has brought about such variety for man's benefit.
Let us then go on to see why this phenomena of varieties occurs and how it occurs. Variety among the individuals of a species occurs as a result of genetic factors. Now the individual inherits genes from its parents, whether it's plants, whether it's animals, or whether it's human beings. This inheritance of genes occurs according to fixed laws. Now genetic material is found on chromosomes. Chromosomes are the genetic material which is found in all cells. Now a gene is a point on the chromosome which controls a particular characteristic. For example, if we take plants, a gene may be responsible for the color of the flower, or a gene may be responsible for the shape of the fruit, and so on. And so we get a variety of genes. Now a gene occurs in pairs because the genes are found on chromosomes, and chromosomes occur in pairs. Now what happens, we find that during reproduction we have a special division called meiosis, but basically it's a reproductive division where the two chromosomes separate and the cell divides. So each cell therefore has one of the pair of all the chromosomes in the cells. And so we find that the gene for a particular characteristic goes to both cells. Let us illustrate this by way of an example. Say if we have a true breeding red flower, and if a true breeding red flower is fertilized with a true breeding white flower, what happens? Now during the division, each of the daughter cells of the maternal plant, let's call one the maternal plant mother and one a paternal plant meaning the father, whether it's for plants or whether it's for humans. So we now discussing an example of plants. So we say that each daughter cell of the maternal plant will have a gene which codes for red because the maternal plant is red. Now the paternal plant is white. So each of the daughter cells of the paternal plant will have a gene for coding for white. Now when these two cells combine to form offspring, then we find that we have one red gene and one white gene. That is, the red gene came from the mother and the white gene came from the father. So the new flower will then have both a red and a white gene, and so the flower will appear pink. Now this is known as a law of segregation. This was stipulated by Mendel, a great physicist who worked out these laws doing many experimentation with plants and so on. Now this is one way in which we get variation. That is because we're inheriting different characteristics from the father's side and different characteristics from the mother's side. Now, just to illustrate this further, now if these two pink plants are fertilized together, cross-fertilized, amazingly we find that we get plants in the offspring which are white in color, we get some plants which are red in color, and we get some plants which are pink in color. And this is due to the fact that these plants receive the different genes from their parent plants. And so the combinations, of course, give you this various combination of colors. And so we see how this variation is brought about, yet within the very same species of plants. Now, sometimes when the offspring has one gene from the father's side, one gene from the mother's side, we find that one gene is said to be dominant. And what happens is that this gene then doesn't allow the other gene to express itself. This is just to illustrate this, like the example I gave you about the red and the white gene. Now, if the daughter cell has got a red gene and a white gene, if the red gene is said to be dominant, then that plant will not be pink, but it will appear red, because the white gene is suppressed and doesn't manifest. So in this way also we find that we have variation in how they are expressed. So various characteristics present on chromosomes of parents get separated in the daughter cells which are formed, and these are then passed on to the offspring. Now, we also have what they call the second law which governs the separation of these genes, which is called the law of independent assortment. What this basically says is that the inheritance of a particular gene is not affected by other genes on the chromosomes, which cover different characteristics. That is, if, say, for example, one gene is coding for a color and another gene is coding for the shape, these two don't affect each other. They separate independently. So basically what it means to say is that we can get any combination. We can get depending on the number of genes that are present. So what we find is, because of the numerous genes that are present on chromosomes, the possible combinations between the maternal and the paternal cells is absolutely enormous. Now let's take an example, for example, in man. Now man has got 23 pairs of chromosomes in each cell. Now the number of possible combinations will be more than 10 to the power 300. What this means is 1 followed by 300 zeros. I mean, this figure, you can't even get a concept of it, you can't even express it. It's just 10 to the power 300. Just to give you an understanding of this, if we take 10 to the power 12, there are not even 10 to the power 12 human beings on this earth. And even if you take all human beings from the time of the earth's creation till today, they won't even number 10 to the power 20 for argument's sake. And here we're talking about possible combinations of 10 to the power 300. So we find that a particular individual inherits only one of these possible combinations. So therefore, we find some of the individuals resemble their parents in some characteristics, some may resemble their grandparents in other characteristics, or even their other ancestors in different characteristics and so on. But there are many billion combinations which were never expressed during the entire history of mankind, because, as I said, the possible combinations are 10 to the power 300, and they haven't even been 10 to the 20th, for argument, humans existing from the time of creation. So therefore we find, because of this tremendous possibility of variation, we find no two individuals look alike, because there are so many possible combinations. Of course, the exception is identical twins. Identical twins look identical simply because they develop from one fertilized cell. So they develop from the same cell, so they would look the same. So we see that all the different types of plants and animals on earth are controlled by genes. And the variation occurs through reproduction and through mutation of these genes. So you see, a date seed only produce date trees. A grape seed only produce grape trees, because this is the inherent gene constitution of the plant. Now the variety in the types of the grapes, for example, or the types of the dates, or the types of the mangoes, as we discussed, results from the variations in their genetic inheritance. Now this is a phenomena referred to in the verses which we quoted earlier. And indeed, it is wonderful and very beautiful how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made this possible. And just to give us some reference from the Quran, Surah 55, verses 10 through 13, we are told, "It is He, that is Allah, who spread out the earth for His creatures, Therein is fruit and date palms having sheeted clusters, also grain with its husk and sweet smelling flowers. Then which of the favors of your Lord will you deny? I think that's all we'll have time for this week. With that, we thank you for joining us on Footprints of the Creator. And that's all from me. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
And from me, Assalamu alaikum. We like to invite you again to join us next week as we will continue our discussion with the plant kingdom.